Every morning before her shift began, Emma would slide a warm plate across the alley behind the diner. No one ever told her to do it, and no one really noticed. But there he was, Noah, always seated under the rusted fire escape, postured dignified despite the worn layers of his coat. Their eyes would meet, and there'd be that tiny pause, like a silent thank you that didn't need words. It wasn't charity. It was something else, something more human. Emma wasn't new to struggle. Life had taught her that people often wore pain behind polite smiles. So when she looked at Noah, she didn't see a beggar. She saw someone holding onto invisible threads of hope. His voice, when he spoke, carried a calm wisdom, the kind you'd expect from a man who had once sat at long boardroom tables. But she never asked questions. She just listened, captivated by his stories of books, of jazz, of sunsets seen from places far richer than this alley. He never begged, never once reached out a hand or asked for more. There was a quiet pride in the way he received the meals, almost as if they were shared between equals. Sometimes he'd quote old poems or talk about art, and Emma would find herself laughing, genuinely, freely. It felt like breathing in a world that too often held its breath. Days turned into weeks, and their exchange became a ritual. Emma found herself lingering by the back door, hoping he'd still be there. She wasn't sure why, but talking to Noah felt grounding, like she could be her whole self without judgment. That kind of connection, it doesn't come around often, and when it does, it demands attention, even if you don't know what to do with it. There was something mysterious about him, how he looked people in the eye, how he spoke with intention. You could feel there was a story behind that gaze, something deeper than just misfortune. Emma didn't push, but inside, questions bloomed like spring weeds. Who was he really? What brought him to that alley? And why did she feel like he saw right through her, even when she barely said a word? The diner's buzz felt different after talking to Noah. The clatter of plates, the hurried conversations, they all blurred into background noise. She'd catch herself smiling at random, then wonder if it was because of him. People think emotional story means grand gestures or epic tragedies. But sometimes, it's just two people sharing silence over a meal that neither of them asked for. And just like that, the world outside the alley began to shift. Not dramatically, not yet, but in those small, powerful ways life does when something important is beginning to stir. Because while Emma believed she was helping a man in need, she had no idea he might be the one to rescue her instead. It happened on a Tuesday. Emma had left the diner early, heart full of plans. She wanted to surprise Lucas, her fiancé, with tickets to a small beach trip. Something simple, something sweet. But as she turned the corner near the bookstore they used to love, her world cracked open. There he was, Lucas, wrapped in the arms of another woman, kissing her like Emma had never existed. Her breath caught. Her hands trembled. Reality slammed into her chest like a freight train. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Emma just walked up, quiet but burning. When Lucas noticed her, he laughed, a cold, sharp sound that didn't match the man she thought she knew. "Still playing the poor waitress?" he said, loud enough for strangers to hear. People turned. Some whispered. Emma stood frozen, humiliation creeping over her skin like fire. And that's when a voice, low, steady, cut through the noise. Noah, out of nowhere, calm as ever, stood between them. He didn't raise his voice or throw punches. He simply said, "You don't speak to people like that." There was something in his presence that silenced the crowd. Lucas scoffed, tried to mock him too, but it didn't land. Because in that moment, Noah wasn't the homeless man behind the diner. He was something else, something powerful and strangely untouchable. Emma looked at Noah, really looked, and what she saw was dignity. A kind of strength that doesn't come from money or power, but from surviving storms most people wouldn't last a day in. She didn't say thank you, not then. But something shifted. Her heart, bruised and aching, found comfort in his stillness. The chaos around her seemed to hush when he was near. Later that night, Emma sat alone on her apartment floor, wondering how love could turn so ugly. She replayed Noah's words over and over, anchoring herself to that one moment of unexpected support. It was a touching story that no one saw coming. A man with nothing stepping up when it mattered most. And somehow, that meant everything. Lucas didn't try to call. He didn't apologize. Maybe he thought she was beneath him. But Emma, for the first time, didn't feel small. She felt noticed, seen, protected. And that feeling, rare and warm, lingered longer than any memory of Lucas ever had. Because sometimes, the people you barely know are the ones who end up knowing exactly who you are. And just like that, Emma started to wonder what else she'd missed about Noah. If he could see her pain in a moment like that, what other truths was he quietly carrying? Emma had never been a liar. Not really. But that day, when her mother called with trembling hope in her voice, something inside Emma cracked. Her grandmother's health was declining, and her only wish before her birthday was to see Emma walk down the aisle. In a moment of panic, Emma said the words before she could stop them. "Yes, I'm engaged." A lie born not from pride, but love. A real story forged in desperation. The weight of that lie grew heavier with each passing day. Emma couldn't sleep. Her stomach twisted every time her mother brought up wedding dresses or shared old photos. How do you plan a wedding that doesn't exist? How do you lie to someone who only has months left to live? But the answer arrived one evening, wearing worn boots and a soft smile, as if fate had been eavesdropping. Noah listened quietly when she confessed. He didn't laugh. He didn't run. Instead, he leaned back, thoughtful, and asked, "Would it really hurt anyone if I helped?" She blinked, confused. He continued, "I'll be your fiancé. Just for now. Just until her birthday." And just like that, a line between stranger and something more blurred. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet. It was kindness dressed up in wedding vows. The courthouse was quiet the day they wed. No flowers, no guests. Just two signatures and a whispered promise that this wasn't real. Emma kept reminding herself of that. Not real. But when Noah took her hand, when he looked at her like she mattered, she forgot how to pretend. There was something about the way he stood beside her, not as a prop, but as if this mattered to him too. Afterwards, they sat on the steps outside, eating vending machine snacks in silence. Emma laughed for the first time in days. Noah just smiled and said, "You're not the only one faking something." She didn't ask what he meant yet, but the way he said it stayed with her. It made her wonder what secrets lived behind that calm exterior, what he was hiding, and why he chose her. As the days moved toward the grandmother's birthday, Emma and Noah rehearsed their story. How they met, their favorite memories, what kind of cake they wanted at the wedding. But somewhere in those rehearsals, something changed. The lines got blurry. The laughter was no longer rehearsed. And the way he looked at her, that wasn't acting anymore. And just like that, a pretend marriage started to feel dangerously real. But Emma didn't dare name that feeling. Not yet. Because some truths come slowly, dripping like melted snow, and others arrive all at once, like a flood you never saw coming. Emma's grandmother lived in a charming old house filled with doilies, porcelain figurines, and memories that clung to the walls like perfume. The day of the birthday arrived with a soft rain and a strange weight in the air. Emma was nervous, rehearsing the story they had practiced. But Noah? He looked calm, almost too calm. As they walked through the door hand in hand, his posture shifted ever so slightly, like he'd done this before. To everyone's surprise, Noah wasn't awkward or shy. He held conversations with grace, helped serve cake, and even complimented the antique teacups with the knowledge of someone who had once owned better. He didn't just blend in, he fit. Emma's relatives raised eyebrows, whispering things like, "He's not what I expected." Her grandmother, however, simply watched him. Quietly, intently, like she was connecting invisible dots. During lunch, Noah laughed with Emma's uncle about vineyard tours in Tuscany. But he'd never mentioned traveling. Later, he helped the grandmother to her chair, and she asked him, eyes sharp despite her age, "What are you really doing here, young man?" He only smiled, polite but unreadable. Emma felt a chill, the kind that comes when something doesn't quite line up. It was the first time she looked at him and didn't feel certain. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She replayed every gesture, every word he'd spoken. Who compliments the pattern on a 1950s bone china plate with that much detail? who knows so much about European art but sleeps behind a diner. It didn't make sense. But instead of fear, Emma felt fascination. Curiosity, a strange warmth that made her want to know more, even if it meant uncovering truths she wasn't ready for. She tried to dismiss the thoughts, to remind herself it was just a favor, a temporary deal. But even the way he looked at her was starting to change. Softer, like he wasn't pretending anymore. And that scared her more than any lie ever could. Because when people change right in front of you, it means you matter. And when someone like Noah starts to matter, everything else begins to unravel. The grandmother watched the two of them, her eyes gleaming with something between suspicion and approval. At one point, she pulled Emma aside and whispered, "That boy has secrets, child, but not the kind that destroy, the kind that reveal." Emma didn't know what to say. She just nodded and tried not to fall any deeper into this emotional story that already felt too real to fake. And as the visit ended and they walked back home in silence, Emma couldn't help but glance at him again. This man who had appeared out of nowhere and somehow made her feel seen. She didn't know who he truly was, but she was starting to understand that whatever she thought she knew barely scratched the surface. It happened like these things always do, not in some dramatic reveal, but in the quietest of ways. Emma was folding laundry with the TV murmuring in the background when she froze. The anchor's voice was saying something about a tech empire, corporate fraud, and a missing billionaire presumed dead. Then, the screen flashed a photo. Her breath vanished. There he was, Noah, but the name beneath read, Jacob West. Emma couldn't move. The room spun. Jacob West. She knew that name. Everyone did. He'd vanished after exposing one of the biggest financial scandals in the country. They said he'd gone into hiding for safety. But no one ever imagined he'd be living behind a diner, wrapped in thrift store blankets, marrying a waitress under an alias. Her hands trembled. Her mind raced. Everything suddenly felt like a lie. When she confronted him, he didn't deny it. He simply looked down, guilt softening his features. "I was trying to disappear," he said quietly. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Emma felt betrayed, used. Was she just a cover? Another fake layer in his hidden world? The man she'd slowly begun to trust wasn't who he claimed to be. That hurt more than she could explain. Not because he was rich, but because he hadn't told her the truth. Noah, Jacob, offered no excuses. He didn't beg. He only said, "I never meant to hurt you." And maybe that's what made it worse. Because she wanted to be angry, to scream. But a part of her still remembered his kindness, his laughter, the way he made her feel during the quietest moments. This wasn't just about money. This was a touching story gone sideways. An emotional crash that no one saw coming. She told him to leave. Not because she hated him, but because she didn't know who he was anymore. And yet, as he packed the few things he had, his movements were slow, like he hoped she'd stop him. She didn't. Her chest ached, her eyes burned, but she said nothing. Sometimes, silence is louder than anger. And in that silence, their brief marriage collapsed like a house built on secrets. After he was gone, the apartment felt colder, quieter. Emma kept thinking of the little things. How he made her laugh without trying, how he noticed when she was too tired to talk, how he once fixed her sink without asking. Those moments had felt real. But were they? Or had she just been a character in someone else's escape plan? And yet, even in that heartbreak, a question echoed in her mind like a soft whisper she couldn't silence. If it was all a lie, why did it feel so much like love? The first letter arrived folded neatly in a cream-colored envelope. No return address. Just her name in elegant handwriting. Emma hesitated before opening it. But the moment she read the first line, "I never meant to disappear from your life without saying what really mattered," her heart clenched. It was from Noah, or Jacob, or maybe both. And for the first time in days, she'd allowed herself to cry. The letters kept coming, one every few days, each one more vulnerable than the last. He wrote about the nights he couldn't sleep, about how pretending not to care around her became impossible. He confessed he never planned to fall in love, but somewhere between the alley behind the diner and their pretend vows, it happened. This wasn't just an apology. It was a real story unraveling slowly, page by page. Then came the video, a flash drive delivered to her doorstep. No note. She played it, expecting another apology. Instead, she saw moments, footage he had recorded quietly. Her laughing on the courthouse steps, brushing flour off her cheek at the diner, tucking her grandmother's blanket in tighter. He had seen her, really seen her, and he had fallen deeply, hopelessly in love. Not with an idea, but with her. She found out later that he had transferred the apartment deed to her name. No fanfare, no strings attached. He had walked away with nothing. Not because he didn't care, but because he did. And that kind of love doesn't fake itself. That kind of love isn't bought. It's felt. And in those quiet acts, Emma realized she had been loved far more deeply than she ever understood in the moment. Still, she wasn't sure what to do. Her heart was healing in slow, unpredictable ways. She reread his letters like maps, trying to trace the journey of a man who had lost everything, and found something unexpected in her. Every sentence held weight. Every line, a window into the soul of someone who'd finally stopped running. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was undeniably an emotional story worth remembering. She began to write back. Not every day, just when the ache became too loud to silence. She didn't know where to send them, but she wrote anyway, letters folded in hope and sealed with trembling hands. Because sometimes love doesn't ask for grand reunions or declarations under the rain. Sometimes love just asks for space and a door left slightly open. And in that space, Emma began to wonder, if fate brought them together once, could it do it again? Or was this story meant to live in memory, waiting just maybe for one last chapter to be written? So, tell me, what would you have done if you were in Emma's shoes? Would you trust again after a love built on a lie? Or would you walk away from something that felt more real than anything you've ever known? Have you ever met someone who changed your life in the most unexpected way? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Seriously, I want to hear your take on this emotional story. Was it fate or just a beautiful accident? And hey, if this real story touched your heart even a little, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notifications. There's so much more coming. Stories that might just make you believe in love again.